Evaluate what we can contribute to strengthen the American Studies course, we must consider the question of the course, which is, what does it mean to be American? As we search for a relationship between many different time periods and a variety of cultures that make up the United States, we are able to identify that family has a universal importance in American identity. Our first story will be American Horse. This story follows a family and a mother and a son who live in an extremely impoverished Indian reservation. It is important to note that this family is not a typical American family because the family consists of a single mother who is an alcoholic and Native American. There are many details in the story that give our class an idea of what living conditions of these reservations are like. An example of this is the unsanitary tin oil drum beneath the kitchen window, full of empty surplus pork cans and beer bottles, caught her eye, as did Uncle Lawrence's physical and mental deteriorations. The mention of these beer bottles also highlight how alcoholism is a huge issue for the mother, Albertine. The government is trying to take away the son, Buddy, from his mother because they believe that he is not being adequately cared for due to the alcoholism present in his family's background. As the story progresses, the reader is exposed to the mother's past. Her father had left her family at a young age, and she had been bitter ever since. By the end of the story, the police are successful and take away the son from her mother. This harsh story about a mother and her son's relationship will well fit with the curriculum involved with the novel Beloved. The story White Angel shows a strong brotherly relationship through the eyes of a 9-year-old boy growing up with his 15-year-old brother in the 1960s. The 9-year-old is always exposed to hard drugs and alcohol before the age of 10. His brother corrupts him in many ways, whether it be by sex or by alcohol and drug use. The family as a whole also has a very large generational gap between the children and the parents. The mother has no control over her oldest son and has very different backgrounds growing up than both her children have. She was born and raised on a farm and now lives in a big city with her family. Both of the boys introduce this new culture to their parents when the eldest brother invites his friends to their parents' dinner party. The adults and the children all have fun drinking, listening to music, and dancing. At the end of the story, the eldest brother goes outside for some strange reason, and when he runs back into the house, he runs straight into the glass door and shatters the glass. He gets a piece of glass in his neck, and he passes away shortly after. The death of his brother is another thing difficult that this 9-year-old boy has to deal with. The youngest son's narrative is another voice that we believe is important to incorporate into our curriculum.
In the very beginning of the year, our American Studies course had briefly mentioned and introduced the racism against Native Americans and the Indian Removal Act. However, there wasn't much focus on the Native American minority, so we want to use American Horse to elaborate on this discussion. With our reading of American Horse, we will include context on the Native Americans and reservations. We will explain to the class how Native Americans were pushed off their land and into confined areas of land, influenced by Europeans with the introduction of alcohol, which created problems of alcoholism, and negatively affected by white interference with Native American children being taken from their families and put into welfare homes and boarding schools. The teachers of American Studies can use this opportunity to update the class in reservations today and Carlisle schools where Native American children are often sent to get a more American education. We will also read this story around the time that our class will read Beloved, because we found connections between American Horse and the story Beloved centered around family relationships. We want our class to identify that Seth's love for her baby was very unique and strong, but it was viewed negatively by the community in Beloved. This is similar to Albertine and Buddy's relationship. Buddy loves his mother and feels secure around her, but the police officers look down upon this relationship. There is another connection to American Horse because Native American culture is present in Beloved. When Paul D is escaping from prison in Georgia, he runs into a Cherokee tribe. To better understand this event, we will read American Horse before this chapter in Beloved. There are many ties between Beloved and American Horse, and so this short story will complement the book well.
The story White Angel fits well into the American Studies curriculum during the 60s unit. Our class will read the story before they start interviewing the relatives about their experiences during the 60s and create a video project. White Angel offers the perspective of a child living during the 60s, which is very similar to the perspectives that our class will be hearing during the interviews. The story will fuel possible questions that our class will ask their relatives. It will encourage the class to ask more difficult and personal questions. White Angel also focuses on the historical context of the 60s, which we do not cover very much in class. The story shows the counterculture and hippie movement of the 60s, making references to events such as Woodstock and the Summer of Love at Haight-Ashbury, which will tie into a major theme of the 60s in the curriculum of the class. Summer of Love at High-Ashbury was essentially where the hippie movement began. It created the attitude of wanting to drop out and disconnect from regular society, and the phrase "free drugs, free love, free music." This is displayed in the story with the two boys who are very involved with drugs. White Angel also contrasts the nuclear families of the 50s with dysfunctional families of the 60s. In order to understand this, our class will need to know that a nuclear family was the perfect, ideal family in which the father would go out to work and the mother would stay home and take care of the kids. This demonstrates the generational gap of the baby boomers in the hippie movement and the more conservative older generation of the 40s and 50s. In the story, the mother of the older generation chooses in a way to ignore that her children were doing drugs. Like many mothers in the 60s, she was trying to keep her family looking perfect by not addressing problems. We believe this is very important for our class to understand in order to get the right context before their interviews. To be able to understand what people in the 60s went through will make it easier to think of rich research questions that the class may ask their interviewee.
On the surface, these two stories seem completely different, but if one looks at them in entirety, it is evident that they both relate to the evolution of family life in America. These stories offer two very different perspectives of growing up in America: a Native American family on a reservation and a dysfunctional family growing up in the middle of Ohio. One family comes to the realization that they are not the perfect family, yet they cope with it. In contrast, the other story shows a family who is struggling to reach normality or the perfect family and tries to cover up their imperfections. Poverty is also a large influence on both stories. In American Horse, the son is being taken because it seems that he is not living in the right conditions because of the poverty and alcoholism seen in his family. In White Angel, the whole family is just trying to get by. Parents both have low-pay jobs, yet they seem to be doing just fine. Adding both stories to the AS curriculum will help future students broaden their understanding of personal perspectives of American society. Being able to read about two completely different family scenarios will teach our class more about what people had to live through in the 1960s and the 1980s.